Wonderful to have all of you in this great new session as part of our second session in our Fundraising Masterclass learning series. This is the first time we've done a full 3-part learning series with the Fundraising Masterclass team. So we appreciate all of you joining in with us and coming to this session. A couple of housekeeping things that we like to check in with. We'd love to have you on camera. It's so nice for the speakers to actually see your beautiful faces. So if you're able to put yourself on camera, we appreciate that. If you have questions, put them in the chat. As we're starting off, we'd love to ask you your name, your organization, and where in the world are you calling in from. So we'd love for you to put in the chat messaging, introduce yourself. If you have your LinkedIn, you can throw that in as well. So it's always nice to see the diversity of people that come to these sessions that are members of Catalyst 2030. This is our first of members only session. And we have a few of our Black Fox philanthropy folks joining us. So thank you to the Black Fox team and the For Impact team for hosting these sessions. So first off, I'm just going to kick it off to our wonderful speakers. And Lisa, thank you so much for helping us coordinate all these series. And we're so happy to have you here. Off to you.
Thank you so much, Debbie. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Mallory and I are thrilled to be here with you all and to talk about back to basics, the building blocks of fundraising. We'll just do a brief intro, and before too long, we are going to kind of jump right into content. It's an honor for both of us to be here. We are both big fans of Catalyst 2030 and what they're doing to gather change makers and leaders around the social sector together. So we're so thrilled and grateful to be here. I'll give you a little bit of background on myself and For Impact, and then Mallory will introduce herself. For Impact, we are a social enterprise ourselves. We are based in the United States, and we help organizations across the social sector tell their stories, fund their visions, and build their teams. We work with organizations across the sector, ranging from small, tiny, all-volunteer staff at a food bank to large INGOs. We work in every sector of the world. And one thing I like the most about our work is that in any given year, about 60% of our work is with organizations, social enterprises, and nonprofits who are out there trying to raise funds. And the other 40% of our work is with funders and intermediaries. So we get this really unique vantage point where funders are telling us the challenges they're having with feeling like they're having an impact with their resource mobilization on their side. So we have this real unique vantage point. We've been around for about 30 years, had about 5,000 clients, raised alongside these clients over 30 years, $2 billion. A little bit of housekeeping from Mallory and I. When we share our lessons learned and our frameworks with you today, everything we do, we aim to be as inclusive as possible. If we ever fail in this regard, please do let us know right away. If you guys have any questions as we are presenting, please go ahead, drop them in the chat. We'll be monitoring that. And we also have time reserved at the end of our session for Q&A. So if you would rather wait and voice your question, that's fine. We'll have time at the end of the session for that, or please drop in the chat at any point along the way. You won't be interrupting us. This is meant as much as possible in one of these Zoom settings to be interactive. I'd like to pretend like we're all sitting at a table together, just having a conversation around this. So without much further ado, let me share my screen and orient everyone to the hour that we have together today. There we go. All right, so when we designed this class, we decided to create a class called the Building Blocks of Fundraising, going back to basics. We wanted to put this session together to speak to, maybe two audiences, if not more. One is those organizations or leaders who are just getting started with fundraising and they don't know where to begin. It feels kind of like this insurmountable mountain and you don't even know how to take that first step. So our hope is that maybe we can share with you some simple premises and building blocks that might give you some confidence and excitement and eagerness to take that first step. Another audience who might benefit from this hour today is those organizations who feel stuck in their fundraising efforts and who might want to bring it back to the basics and kind of strip away some of the thoughts and complications running through their head and kind of bring it back to the basics. So that was the impetus of putting this class together today. We are going to focus on three things today. We're going to focus on three things. When we think about going back to basics, Mallory and I designed this course to, one, talk about how you show up. Mallory's got this amazing research and training that she does around fundraiser orientation, how to orient yourself to showing up as a fundraiser. We're then going to talk about who you engage, and last, how you engage. So how it is that you show up into this space. There's a lot of, this is something that I think is so often overlooked, and Mallory's taught me so much just as we've prepared for this course, who it is we engage and how we engage. So Mallory, I'll kick it on over to you to let you introduce yourself and talk about a fundraiser orientation.
Amazing. Thank you, Lisa. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be with all of you today. I'm calling in from Berkeley, California. So it is 7:06 a.m. So as I continue to take little sips of my coffee, I am so excited to be with all of you today. So I don't know who else on here can relate to this, but I jokingly say that I became an accidental fundraiser, and I started working in the nonprofit sector. I've actually spent my entire career in the nonprofit sector. And I started to get promoted up into different positions inside nonprofits. First found myself in a managing director role, and then an executive director role that had big fundraising responsibilities. And I had a lot of dreams and ideas about what fundraising was going to look like. As you'll see on the next slide, I thought that I was going to be having funders come to me. I was going to be this empowered and confident leader, that I was going to see consistent fundraising success, but the reality was quite different. And I call this phase of my life the impact report fake time, because the reality was running this nonprofit was a constant hustle, and I didn't have a donor pipeline that I trusted. I felt so incredibly uncomfortable showing up as a fundraiser all the time. I was sure that I was a bad fundraiser because I thought there was no way that good fundraisers wanted to throw up before every major donor meeting. And I felt this real pressure to put on this sort of perfectionist lens, that I had everything together, that everything was running smoothly. But I was working, 12 to 15-hour days. I was sacrificing a lot of my relationships, my health. I ended up developing chronic pain. And it really brought me to this moment in my career where I said, okay, I cannot keep doing this like this anymore. I either need to figure out a way to fundraise fundamentally differently, to show up to this work differently, or I might have to leave the sector. I might have to leave this work because I cannot get this fundraising thing to work for me. And so I ended up having sort of an accidental fusion of different life experiences. I got certified as an executive coach. I got trained in habit and behavior design with Dr. BJ Fogg, and I was also trained in design thinking. Now, none of those frameworks were connected initially to my fundraising, but I was frontline fundraising as I was learning them. And they radically shifted the way that I showed up as a fundraiser. And so we are going to start with this fundraiser orientation piece, which is really about who you are as a fundraiser, because your ability to talk about money, to invite people to invest in the work that you're doing, whether you're a social enterprise or a nonprofit, a lot of that relates back to the thoughts and the beliefs that you hold about money and value and fundraising and yourself. And so all of my work is really rooted in one of these primary executive coaching principles, which is the idea that our thoughts and our beliefs inform how we feel, and then ultimately how we show up and how we engage. Fundraising at its core is about connection. Money moves in connection. Do you and me want to do something together? Do we want to create the community or the world that we both want to live in together? That's what great fundraising is about. But a lot of times what holds us back from reaching that are thoughts and beliefs that we're holding about money, about our organizations, about our work, that make us uncomfortable and then hold us back from taking action. And I'm just going to give you an example of this, because we come into, as I was falling asleep last night, I was thinking about all the times in my life where I was uncomfortable saying I was a fundraiser, right? How uncomfortable I felt in that room because there was stigma attached to it that I felt, right? That people were like, oh, and sometimes I would even have weird experiences where someone would say, don't ask me for money. And then you're like, oh, that doesn't feel good. First of all, I wasn't going to, but second of all, like that doesn't feel comfortable. And so those things, they really get into our psyche and they really impact the way that we show up into this work. And an example I give to folks all the time is, let's say that you emailed a potential funder and you don't hear back from them for 72 hours. And you start to think in your head, oh, they must be really mad that I emailed them. I must have sent that email too close to when I sent to another email. I said something wrong inside that email. We start spiraling with all of these interpretations and assumptions and thoughts and beliefs. And if that's the story, if that's the narrative that we're telling ourselves, they must be so mad at me for emailing them about blank, 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 we're going to feel incredibly uncomfortable. And how many more donors are we going to email today, or funders are we going to email today? Probably zero. But if we can start to bring awareness to some of these thought patterns, we can interrupt them and we can say things to ourselves like, actually, it's been 72 hours. People are very busy. There's a lot of different things going on, and we can start to calm ourselves down and we can start to address some of that discomfort so that we'll continue forward in our fundraising. And I'll be honest, when I started fundraising, I had this belief that fundraising was, once I got past my phase of thinking it was all going to be super easy, I really felt like fundraising was asking people to do something that they didn't really want to do, but I was trying to figure out exactly the right way to ask them so that maybe they would give me some of their money for my project. But when I actually started to look deeper into this cognitive behavior loop for my own fundraising, I started to realize that great fundraising is not an ask, it's an offer. That it's about partnership and opportunity, inviting people in. Like I was saying before, do we want to build this together? We have different, we'll talk about this a little bit later, we have different assets, we have different ways to contribute, me and you, to solving this crisis that we both care about. So do we want to partner? Do we want to work together? And this really, everything that we're going to talk about today is rooted in this, that great fundraising is not an ask, it's an offer. And that when we can adopt the thoughts and beliefs that surround that, we're going to feel and then show up fundamentally differently as a fundraiser. So I want to play a little game. If you're like, okay, Mallory, I'm not sure how, I feel about getting into, the psychology of where I am as a fundraiser. I want to just play a quick little game to show you how much this impacts the funding that you find, the funding that you see, and the opportunities that you see in front of you. So I'm going to show you a picture right now, and maybe you want to put it in the chat, or maybe you're sitting back and drinking your coffee too, and you don't want to. It looks like maybe a part of the slide, at least on my screen, is getting cut off. I don't know if other people are experiencing that. I'll widen mine in case it's mine, but it looks like a part of it might be, oh, perfect. There, it's back. Okay. So I don't know if you want to tell me in the chat if you've played this game before. Please don't say it. But if you've never seen this image before, I'd love to hear in the chat if you want to share what you're seeing right now. Usually what I hear from folks is they are seeing a bunch of black and white spots, and maybe folks are still warming up to this idea. But I love showing this image to people because for most people, when they look at this, they just see a bunch of black and white blobs. But then I can show you what's really behind this photo. It's a snake. But here's the coolest part of this. Can we go to the next slide? Oh, palm and island. Can you still see the snake? What happened, for those of you who saw the black and white blobs at the beginning, and then you saw the snake, and then you can still see the snake now in the black and white image, what you're seeing there is something called the experiential blindness and curing experiential blindness. So the way that our brain works, the slides might be moving a little too slow for it to work because it has that long dread. But if you look at the snake for long enough, and then you look at this picture, most people can still see the outline of the snake. What our brain is doing is that we have something called experiential blindness. When we don't have context for something, we can't actually see it in our world around us. There's this incredible book by Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett called How Emotions Are Made. And she demonstrates the fact that have you guys ever had an experience where you hear about something for the first time, and then all of a sudden you start to hear about it everywhere, or you start to see it everywhere. And you're like, wow, that's so weird. I just learned about this and now it's everywhere around me. That's another example of experiential blindness and getting cured of experiential blindness, which is once we start to have context for something, once we know about something, once we believe in something, we start to see evidence of that thing everywhere. And so the reason why this is so important to understand for fundraising is because if we believe that there are not enough funding options for our organization, if we believe that there aren't funders who are aligned with X, Y, and Z, if we hold those beliefs, we are not actually going to be able to see them there. We will not be able to see the context there. There's some other really interesting science that I won't go into around this, around the science of serendipity, where when we believe things like this exist in the world around us, we actually increase our own internal capacity to see them. Okay. So, and I'm sorry if those slides had a little drag so that you weren't able to see it, but I encourage you, if you get the slides later, you can probably even look it up online to go back and forth in a quick way between the two, and you'll start to see those come together. So one of the things to understand, and one of the reasons why your thoughts and your beliefs are so critical, is because donor behavior, funder behavior is a response behavior. So oftentimes we talk about funder behavior, we talk about donor behavior in a way as if it's happening out there, away from us and happening to us. But most funder behavior is a response to how the funder is prompted, invited in by the fundraiser. And the number one thing that impacts how we show up as fundraisers is the psychology and how we feel behind our fundraising. So I just want to say that again, funder behavior is a response behavior, and it's a response to how we show up as fundraisers. So this is really why we're starting this orientation today. Before we talk about how you prospect and how you message to certain prospects, all of this really has to start with you. And so I wanted to give you one more kind of quick framework. If you're feeling like, I don't necessarily know how to tap into how I feel or how I'm showing up as a fundraiser, if this concept feels really new for you, I want to give you one more access point to start to tap into some of this awareness. Okay. So we can go to the next slide. Okay. So there's this concept in the executive coaching that I'm trained in called catabolic and anabolic energy. So these types of energy, they exist in the environment. We are not going into any sort of woo-woo energy here. Catabolic energy exists in the environment. Catabolic energy is really draining, resisting energy. It's when we experience a lot of dread. When we're in catabolic energy, we have a lot of black and white thinking, a lot of judgment, a lot of tunnel vision. Anabolic energy, on the other hand, is a really rejuvenating, exciting, connected form of energy. So I usually say in catabolic energy, we're in tunnel vision. In anabolic energy, we're in a prism of opportunities. And so some people call this a flow state when they're in their anabolic energy. And so sometimes for folks who are maybe starting to bring awareness to how they feel or some of their thoughts or their beliefs around fundraising for the first time, being able to sense your energy in a moment can sometimes be an easier access point. So I wanted to just give you all a minute to sort of tap into a memory for yourself to be able to draw this point home. And so I want you to think about a recent time where you experienced catabolic energy. So catabolic energy, again, is that draining, resisting, depleting feeling energy. It's on the next slide. And I want you to just think about the last time you experienced catabolic energy. What was that experience like? What did that energy feel like in your body? And how did that influence how you showed up as a fundraiser? So the last time you were feeling dread or resistance around your fundraising, I want you to sense what that was like for you and how that then impacted how you showed up as a fundraiser. And then I want you to do the same thing for anabolic energy. So I want you to think about when the last time you were in a flow state where time just disappeared and you were like, oh my gosh, what happened? How did I get here? I want you to think about what that experience was like, what that energy felt like in your body, and how it influenced how you showed up. And if you want to spend more time like journaling about reflections about these later, this will start to give you some information as you start to have some more awareness around that cognitive behavior loop concept. And so if you go to the next slide. Yeah. So awareness of our energy, it really just gives us important information. It's not there so that you can be like, oh my gosh, there I am in catabolic energy again. Oh no, I know this is giving me tunnel vision. It's really just to notice, to give us information. Okay, wow, I'm experiencing a lot of catabolic energy right now. That's probably making me have some binary views on this situation or a lot of black and white thinking here. I wonder, what it was that brought me into catabolic energy. What might it take for me to shift my energy right now? So just really getting curious. And if you end up connecting with me after this, I have a lot of work focused on this. If you want tips for how you move from catabolic energy into anabolic energy, I have a ton of those. We don't have time to go into all of those today, but catabolic and anabolic energy, just so you know where this framework ultimately leads, is that it exists on a spectrum. And so if we go to the next slide, you can see that there are actually 7 different styles of fundraising, 7 levels of energy, from deeply catabolic energy up to fully anabolic energy. We're never one type of energy. We're never fully catabolic. We're never fully anabolic. I think about sometimes those old boom boxes with the lights that flicker up and down. We're always a combination of different energy levels, but they impact the perspective, the view, the vantage point, the experiential blindness that we approach fundraising with. So really just introducing this to you is to help bring you into the idea that how you think and how you feel is a critical component to how you're ultimately going to approach your fundraising. And so here's the last slide about this. We talk a lot in fundraising about our strategy, fundraising strategy, and we are so focused on our fundraising strategy. And I'm not saying fundraising strategy is not important. We're about to get into more of the tactics in 1 second, but it is so important to understand that a lot of what allows or doesn't allow us to actually implement our fundraising strategy has to do with what is happening inside of us. And so I really want to encourage you to incorporate personal development and awareness and growth into your fundraising work, because it is such a critical component of our ability to actually implement and execute on all of the different strategic elements. Okay, Lisa, let me pass it to you. I've been talking for a long time, but I hope that lays the framework around this piece around how who you are as a fundraiser really orients to this work.
Thank you so much, Mallory. I've just gotten to know Mallory over the last month in preparation for this session together, and listening to her talk is like having a drink of water when I didn't realize I was thirsty, or like catching my breath when I didn't realize I was holding it. And so it's, no one is talking like you do right now in this space, Mallory, and it's just so refreshing. I think I screwed up the snake slide, you guys. It's on me, as my kids say. That's on me. They always say that's on me, because they know I can't get that mad if they say that. So I'm going to try again. I don't know, maybe there's something wrong with my connection, but can everybody see the snake now? The picture of the snake? Okay, I'm going to go to the black and white one, okay?
Yes.
And I'll go back and forth a couple times so we can show Mallory's point.
It's okay. I think it just, what I've realized, I've never used it on a slide thing like this. I think it just, when it's really fast, you can see it much easier versus when there's like a slow tread, but it's okay. Folks can play with it later. It'll be a good take home game. And
I'm sure,
I'm sure if folks didn't get it here, you've had the experience where you learn about something for the first time, and then all of a sudden you see evidence of that everywhere. Or you've played any of those like magic discovery books where you're looking for the image in all the other images. And then once you see it, you really see it, right? It doesn't go away. And so we've all had different, I like to play that game live, but we've all had different experiences that I think reinforce that point.
Thank you so much, Mallory. Okay, awesome, guys. So building blocks of fundraising, we talked about just now how you engage and the energy you show up into the space with. I am going to spend some time talking about who you engage. You know, if anyone came to the last one of these I did for Catalyst 2030, it was quite similar. So some of this is going to be a little repetitive, but I think it's important enough for new folks to bring back up. How do we find funders? All right. How do we find funders for our social enterprise or for our nonprofit? Who should we be talking to? I suspect, having done this work for a while, that a lot of people in this room probably spend a lot of time having conversations with individuals who are not qualified funders. And when I'm going to talk about funders today, everybody, I am casting a really wide net. I am talking about foundations, corporations, individuals, big institutional funders like governments. And so I'm talking about funders, you know, at large, but these frameworks are going to apply to all. So one thing I want to encourage you all to do when you are out starting to have funding conversations for the work you're doing, let us make sure that you are spending your time with qualified prospects. How do we define a qualified prospect? At For Impact, we say it's a two-part test. And I don't think this is going to shock anyone in this room. I suspect if I had the time for you all to crowdsource this answer, you'd nail it in a minute. It is those funders that have, it's those funders that have capacity and a connection to the cause. Okay. I'll tell you where we go wrong a lot. And I do this too. A lot of times we spend a lot of our time and effort focused on funders with capacity who are not connected to our cause. That's probably not the best use of your time, or funders who might be really connected to the cause but not have the capacity. Those are very good people, like we need them in the world. But if you only have 2 hours a week to spend on raising funds, that's probably not where you want to go. So we want to make sure that you are with qualified prospects, that you are with qualified funders. Okay. Now, once we know we're with qualified funders, what do we do? How do we have these funding conversations? How do we identify these funders? So this is a 3-part framework. All right. And the value I want to share here with you all is that these are 3 separate and distinct steps. Okay. These are 3 separate and distinct steps when we are prospecting. All right. So the first thing we want to do is identify qualified prospects. When we identify, the word association I would love for you all to think about is fearless. I would encourage everybody to be fearless as you are identifying potential funders for your organization. All right. At this moment in time, we are at step 1 of a 3-part process. I do not want to worry about part 3, which is how we're going to get to them. Let us worry about that when we get there. But I can guarantee this, if we do not identify them in step 1, we will never get to them. So at this moment in time, please do not limit yourself. Please do not tell yourself, I have no way to get to that funder. They won't be interested in our work. We're not big enough. We haven't scaled. We don't have the perfect board. You know, we have these limiting beliefs that we all place on ourselves. I think I'm maybe just as guilty as anybody else in the world at this, telling myself why they're not a good funder for us right now. What I want to encourage everyone in this room to do is not make decisions for funders. Let them make their own decisions. Let us first be brave and fearless when we identify them. The posture I would encourage us all to have as we are identifying potential funders is they are waiting for us to find them. They don't know we exist, but they are waiting for us to find them. Okay, so how do we identify funders? That's probably, you guys are all like, yeah, we get it, you know, have a positive mindset, but how do I find these? I wish I could share with you guys a magic formula or, you know, what is it called? Like the perfect bullet, like this is how you find them. Nobody knew. And now you know. There's maybe the value I can add is there's nothing that you're missing. There's no magic that you're missing. A couple of thoughts. One, I want to ensure that you are maximizing your current funders. Okay, so look at who's currently funding you, make sure you've maximized them. What do we mean by maximize? That you've sat with them one-on-one, you've shared your work, you've shared your impact, and that you've actually made an ask in which you expected a yes or no response. Okay, about 6 months ago, I was with this incredible organization in South Africa, and I was sharing this point that we need, as we're identifying funders, before we find new ones, let's make sure we've maximized our current ones. And this founder came up to me afterwards and she said, you know, it's really interesting. We just received $60,000 US from a corporation in South Africa who was going to underwrite the cost of some leadership and entrepreneurial training that they run. And she said that $60,000 came about because they found us. They asked us to submit a grant. We submitted it and we heard back via emails, $60,000 is what we can give you. And she said, I don't know that I've maximized them. She said, when I heard you talk, I realized I haven't spoken with them one-on-one. I haven't asked even for a specific amount of money. And so what she did that evening, true story, she scheduled a Zoom call with this CSR person at the corporation and said, you know, of course, we're grateful for the $60,000. There's more work that we're trying to do. Could we talk about that? And over the length of an hour phone call, that gift went up to $100,000 because she was with them one-on-one and she was able to share the work in an engaging way one-on-one and actually make an ask, not just via a grant. Now, is that always possible? Of course not, but let's ask ourselves and make sure that we haven't missed that. Okay, so 1, maximize current funders. 2, how do we find new funders? I told you guys we've been around for 30 years. We, a couple years back, did a humongous survey of all the organizations we've worked with. And we asked them, how are you finding your funders? And it came down to 2 things. It came down to research and referrals. Okay, so research, there's nothing glamorous about it. Somebody on your team, it doesn't need to be the founder or the executive director or the CEO, but somebody on your team should be setting news alerts, Google alerts for anything they can find about funders. We need to be looking at who's funding similar organizations or similar causes. It's just doing the time online is really the way I think about it. A few years back, the UN had a generation equality forum. I don't want to mess this up. It was in July of 2021. All of these organizations showed up to this forum and pledged how much they were going to support in terms of gender equality over the next 10 years. Foundations were there, corporations were there, and they all made public statements, right? You know, we're here from the Ford Foundation and we are going to, earmark however many millions of dollars. So what we did, I do a lot of work in the space of gender. And so what I did was I just want to share this example. I did a search on everyone who made a public statement around how much they were going to support this work. I made an Excel spreadsheet and I captured every press release. And wouldn't you know, every org I work with that works on gender, we went to we had a plan to hit up each of those organizations who publicly pledged support. So this is what I mean by research. It's not glamorous, but it takes some time. Great work for a team member to do, a support staff member. Referrals, never leave a meeting or a conversation without asking the person with whom you're speaking, you understand our work, you get what we're doing, do you know anyone who might like to hear about this? It's important that we ask the question and not just assume that the person with whom we're speaking is going to think to make that connection. All right. There's actually data behind this. There are studies out there out of actually the University of Michigan in the United States that has concluded that 90% of generosity is unlocked by asking. True story. And so the bad news is, I wish that more generosity was unlocked without having to ask. But the good news is now we know if we ask, do you know anyone? Or, hey, I've been trying to get to X foundation. Or, hey, there's a government official that I'm having a hard time getting a meeting with. If we ask, we're going to unlock some generosity right there. Okay, so as we are identifying potential funders, I want you please just to be fearless. All right, to be fearless. 2 more thoughts around identifying funders. All right. At For Impact, we often work with organizations to create what we call an ideal prospect persona. Okay, an ideal prospect persona. And what we do is we think about a list of the best characteristics of your perfect prospect. Dream up, if you could create your perfect prospect, who would it be? And write those characteristics down. And true story, there are a lot of times you can match this ideal persona with a real person, a real foundation, a real corporation. So sometimes we can work at it backwards. A story I want to share is that years ago, I worked with an organization working to help children diagnosed around the world with cancer. Okay, their goal was that a child diagnosed with cancer, no matter what country, what part of the world they live in, should have an equal chance of survival and equal access to medical care. So we dreamed up their ideal persona, and we said, we would love to find a pediatric oncologist. We were thinking about individuals at this moment, a pediatric oncologist. At the time, this organization was scaling to Mexico. They were going to build a center of excellence there. So we wanted a pediatric oncologist who has either volunteered or has family from Mexico or has volunteered there. And what we did was we shared this dream profile with the board. And somebody on the board was able to go to a conference and find somebody who fit this description. And we reached out to this gentleman and we said, this is going to sound crazy, but you're exactly who we've been looking for. This was a cold email. And wouldn't you know, he had no idea this organization existed and he was very interested in learning more. All right. So this is the power of an ideal persona. You might think about creating an ideal corporation that might support you with their CSR, or an ideal foundation. All right. And then backwards, plan your way into how do I connect, right? But at this point, we're still thinking about identification. I'm going to turn it back over to Mallory real quick, who has another way that she looks at how can we identify qualified prospects.
Thank you, Lisa. Now I'm trying to figure out how I bring myself back on, which I'm not totally sure about how to pin there I am. Okay. People who understand this better than I do. Okay. So, I found when I was doing prospect research that one of the things that was hard for me initially was really trying to understand alignment between my organization and those prospects and how to talk about alignment. So what we're going to talk about right now is something I use inside my signature program, which is called the Power Partners Formula. And it's this concept called asset mapping. And what I have found with asset mapping is that it can be really helpful both in the identification of alignment and prospects, and it can sometimes help us get over those limiting beliefs around like, oh, we're too small for them, or we're too blank for them, because we start to see actually how we have assets that those particular funders are interested in. So a lot of times when we think about the value of our organization, we are only thinking about it through the lens of the services and the programs that we provide. And of course, those are very, very specific and important assets that the organization provides, but we have so many other things of value inside our organization that funders are interested in tapping into in their partnership with us. So as Lisa said at the beginning, we're taking some broad strokes here in terms of the types of funders that we're talking about. What you can see here are a list of different assets, some of which apply more to potentially like a corporate partnership, others that apply more to a foundation prospect, and others that might be more valuable to individuals. And so the first step here, this is a big piece of what we do inside Power Partners, but I wanted to introduce the concept for you so that you can start to think about what are your organization's assets beyond your program and services, right? Do you have thought leaders on your board of directors? Do you collect really great impact data? Are you good at collecting video stories and testimonials about folks who engage in your program? Do you have a strong network through your board of directors? Do you have very applicable restricted funding needs? Like some organizations, getting restricted funding is incredibly difficult, incredibly painful, but other organizations have great places to slot in funders who focus on, program only restricted grants. So starting to understand what are the assets of your organization that could make you a good fit for a potential funder can be really helpful. And so your your assets fall into a number of different categories. And so I just want to provide a little slide of the different types, really the different categories of assets. So you have assets around your organization's influence. You have assets around your organization's ability to educate the public on an issue area that you likely understand better than anyone. Your networks are assets, the different skills that your staff members have, right? All of these different things you see listed on here. And there's one thing I just want to say before I hand it back to Lisa, which is that, you do not need to have all of these assets. The idea is to understand which assets you have and how those assets align the most strategically with certain types of funders. And once you start to map out your assets, which you should do after this call, maybe with your team, have some fun, brainstorm. Once you start to cure your own experiential blindness of all of the assets you have inside your organization, then as you start to do your prospect research, as you start to look into different funders, you'll start to notice different types of assets that different funders are looking for. And you'll be able to see all of a sudden at different points of alignment that you didn't see before. You'll be able to see fit that you might not have noticed before. Okay, Lisa, let me hand it back to you. I just wanted to add that in there really quickly.
Thanks so much, Mallory. And I think, the theme you'll hear from both of us is that we are acutely aware that nobody in this room has enough time to fundraise. You're wearing 17 different hats. So how can we make it so that that time you are spending to mobilize resources for your organization is a valuable time, right? And you're going to get a return on that. So thinking about your ideal persona or thinking about asset mapping, matching your organization's assets to funders and what they want is a way that we hope and we see you can make your time spent fundraising more effective. Okay, so we are being brave when we identify funders. Then I would encourage everybody to prioritize your funders. When we prioritize them, I would encourage you to be systematic. Okay, so again, not enough time to fundraise. If you have a list of, 10 or 20 potential funders, I don't want you to look at that list and freeze because you don't know where to start. Okay, so if you can have some methodology that works for you and your organization where you can rank from your most likely funder or your best prospect to your worst. This is not meant to quantify these relationships as good or bad relationships, but let's just think about how we spend your time. I won't go into a lot of detail on how to prioritize because I could spend 3 hours on it. Honestly, I think my big takeaway is that you do it. A really quick, simple way, and you can just kind of see where I'm coming from. You could give a score from 1 to 10 on capacity. And you guys, this is an art, not a science. Capacity. Okay, and give a score from 1 to 10 on connection to the cause. And you shouldn't spend more than 45 seconds thinking of what that number is. You don't need to be doing a ton of research here at this moment. And then, the highest score out of 20 is going to be your best prospect down to the worst. Okay, there's other types of, metrics you might want to put in there, geographic or were they a previous funder, or what is their gift history to organizations like us? You can come up with that. But I do encourage you all to have a system in which you approach your funders. Okay. Last but not least, at this point, we have identified our funders. We have prioritized them. Now we are going to strategize. We're going to strategize in 2 ways. 1, to get the visit. And 2, we are going to strategize the visit itself. Okay, so this is the time. Only now are we going to ask ourselves, how do I get to them? Okay, only now at this point in our prospecting process. Okay, to get that visit, what assets might you use? All right, do you have board members that might be able to introduce you? Do you have some great videos? Do you have, you can always do an email. I know the last one of these was about a conference. Can you connect with someone at a conference? I work with a lot of really, really small organizations that don't go to conferences. That's okay. Who can we email? How can we send things? I once worked with an organization that was trying to get to the IKEA Foundation, and they bought a piece of IKEA furniture and built it while they made a video talking about their organization. All right. We probably don't have the bandwidth to do that for everyone, right? But don't forget the value of just kind of being creative, dropping a book in the mail with an inscription. These are all different ways that we can do this. I was just on a panel last week where a woman told me she was having a hard time and she kept commenting on social media posts and nobody was responding from the funder. And so she took a bunch of pictures of all the times and sent an email with all the pictures. And they wrote back, oh, yeah, you're actually like our #1 fan on social media. Would love to set up a call with you. So just, I think, get creative. I have here to remember the last investor strategy. You cannot use this strategy with every funder. Probably you do not have the bandwidth, but I think it's a really neat mindset to think, what would we do if this was our last investor? If this was the last potential funder between us having to shut our doors or us being able to stay open and continue to do this work that is so important? What would we do? How would we act? Would we send an email? And then if they don't write back, think, well, we tried. Right? We tried, they never responded. So how would we act if that was our last potential investor? All right. So, a bit of encouragement to get creative around how to get that visit. We want that visit. We want one-on-one connection with funders, even foundations. I do not encourage anyone to have a relationship with the grant portal, but instead try to have that connection with the person. All right. Do I have time? You know what, I'm going to keep going with how we engage with funders. And if we have time at the end, I'll share a story around this, but I'm for right now going to keep moving. So the last thing that Mallory and I wanted to talk about, guys, is how we engage. So at this moment, we have identified, we've got the right fundraiser mindset that Mallory talked about, or we're able to kind of go in and out of this flow through some work. We have identified, prioritized, we have a visit. How are we going to engage with that funder? How are we going to share the work about the organization we do? Right now we're talking about the message that we give the funder. Okay, this is our fundraising message. We often say it for impact, that message is not what we say, but what people hear. Okay, message is not what we say, but what people hear. So we want to do all the work beforehand to make it so that the funder hears what we intend for them to hear. Okay. We want to make sure they hear the message we want. What we have found over lots of years is that all funders, regardless of the type of funder, have 3 essential questions when it comes to conversations around resource mobilization and fundraising. They want to know, to what end? Why do you exist? To what end? They want to know, where does the money go? And they want to know, how can I help? Or what do you need from me? Okay, so we have used this altitude framework. It's one way to message for fundraising. This altitude framework has been out there for ages. We hear about a high level overview or down in the weeds. We have simply taken that framing and overlaid it on top of fundraising messaging for nonprofits and social enterprises. So we would encourage organizations to have a 10,000 meter message. All right, a 10,000 meter message. In the US, we usually say a 30,000 foot message. This is the altitude at which airplanes fly. All right, so you have to imagine kind of being on a red eye, waking up, looking out the window, seeing almost the curvature of the earth. This is our high level message of why we exist. All right. Oftentimes, organizations in the social space skip over that 10,000 meter message and they jump right into what it is we do. I think there's probably a lot of theories for why that happens. My theory is that we skip it because we live at the programmatic level and we are trying to pay our staff and we're trying to keep the lights on and we're trying to, run 50 after school programs. That why we exist is almost like inscribed within us, but we forget to engage funders around it. This 10,000 meter message is where we can probably derive the greatest engagement with the funder. So my encouragement for all of you is don't skip over that. Spend time engaging a funder around your why and also ask them questions about their why. All right. At 5,000 meters, here we're thinking top of a mountain looking down. It's going to answer the question, our 5,000 meter message is going to answer the question, what we do or where the money goes. All right. If we don't answer it, the story is going to get away from us, and the funder will probably create, their own version of where they think the money is going to go. All right. A practical tip around the 5,000 meter message. Practical tip. You all have very likely heard something like this before. There is a lot of data out there that shows that the brain loves hearing things in groups of 3. When we hear things in 2s, we put them at competition with each other, like salt or pepper, black or white, this or that. But when we hear things in groups of 3, we kind of have a much easier time remembering. And there's a lot of examples throughout history: mama bear, papa bear, baby bear, and small, medium, large. The US Constitution has life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If we had more time, I would ask everyone to drop some in chat, because it's neat to hear the ones from different cultures around the world. If at 5,000 meters, we can talk about what we do in a group of 3, if we can. I don't want anyone to twist themselves into a pretzel to make that happen, but it's very easy for a conversation piece and for a funder to walk away remembering what it is you do. Okay, so that cancer organization that I told you about, where we used that ideal persona, we were able for their 5,000 meter message. Well, let me come up to their 10,000 meter message. We said they exist to ensure that all children diagnosed with cancer have the same chance for survival and access to treatment. Okay, that's their why they exist. And we do this in 3 ways. We focus on the child, the family, and the community. And we were able to talk about what they do for the child, right? They provide medical treatment and care and counseling for the family. They provide transportation and, again, counseling for the community. They build these centers of excellence. Sometimes it comes down to, we do this in 3 ways. We run programs, we, do advocacy, and we do something else. I'm kind of talking off the top of my head, but at 5,000 meters, a real practical tip is, if you can think in a group of 3, it's going to be real easy and clear for a funder to understand. And then down at 1 meter, it's going to answer the question, how can I help? All right. So we want to tell a funder in that conversation how they can help. What we don't want to do, or what I would discourage, is what I call like the ... close. So it's like, here's why we exist, here's what we do / where the money goes ... And we wait for the funder to say, oh, that's great, I see where I plug in. I would encourage in these conversations to take it to that 1 meter message and say, would it be okay if I talk to you about how you can help us? Would it be okay if I talk to you about what you could do or how we could partner? Okay. Another practical tip, we often at 1 meter talk, we love the rule of 3. We have a 3-part answer to that. How can I help? We talk about champion, invite, and invest with funders. You can be a champion of our organization. The beautiful thing about that word champion is it can mean 1,000 different things. You customize it to what you need. We would love it if you could, write an op-ed, or if you could, share this link to this virtual event we're having. You could champion, invite. You understand what we do. You understand where we're going. Is there anyone else that that would like to hear about our work? If so, could we ask you to connect us with them? And then, of course, invest. Now, that can be a whole nother class for another day, how we talk about the funding needs. But right now and today, when we're doing our building blocks and how you engage, my recommendation for you all, or what I see work in the field on a daily basis, is to be clear with your message, why you exist, where the money goes, and how someone can help. And I would encourage you to not assume the funder knows more than they do. We all do this in this sector. So make it easy and simple to understand. One last thought on this altitude framework. It is just a conceptual reference. There's no right or wrong altitude. The important thing is that you know at which level you're communicating. So if you get pulled down to 1 meter or to 5,000 meters, that's fine. I would probably try to pop back up to 10,000 to make sure you're able to convey that. So know at which altitude you're communicating. And my second takeaway is that we find, by and large, funders will communicate at the altitude of your choosing. All right, they will often communicate at the altitude of your choosing. There might be one out there that'll want to dig into, an overhead question, in which case we answer that. But then we can also come back to our 5,000 or our 10,000 meter message. So you guys, this was a lot to fit into an hour. Mallory and I were hopeful that we could spend some time, talking about how we show up who we engage using that identify, prioritize, and strategize framework, and then how we engage, meaning how it is that we share the work that our organization is doing and how it is that we're able to engage funders in this way. At this point, if anybody, yeah, I don't know, we've gone a little bit over, Debbie. I don't know if you just want me to hand it over to you or if I'm happy to stay on for
Couple of
Q&A. And I
questions.
think,
Yeah, let's
great.
go ahead and take a couple of questions.
Yeah. Great.
First question that we had in the Q&A.
Oh, yes, I answered it in the Q&A, but I'll verbally say it here too as well. So it was a great question. It was like, what are things we can keep in mind when you fundraise for yourself or you're raising your own salary, to be specific? And so what I talked about, I wrote this out. I don't know if everyone can see the answer. I will put it into the chat as well. But that really the thing or I guess I can't copy and paste that. The thing to focus on is how your work impacts the work of the organization. So we can often get a lot more uncomfortable when we're thinking about fundraising for our salaries. It feels a lot more personal. And so that piece around what are the thoughts and the beliefs that we hold, I would be super aware of that when it comes to fundraising for your own strategy. But your work in whatever capacity you're in is ultimately making the work of the organization possible. And so I think making that connection and demonstrating the way that your time is impacting the work that the funder is so passionate about is the role we play as fundraisers, is helping them see that story.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, Mallory, thanks. I agree with, of course, everything you said. And, just as a practical matter, like when we're talking about the work we do at that 5,000 meter level where the money goes, we usually always fold staff salaries and overhead costs and administrative costs into the programs. Now, of course, we're always ready to answer that question. How much is the staff's, being paid, or how much is this or that? But I very much believe none of that work takes place, without those overhead costs. So I feel very comfortable folding that in. And then one last note of encouragement. I am not kidding. This has happened 4 times just in 2023 with organizations I work with, where they will receive a grant. I want to talk about posture here, you guys. They'll receive a grant from a foundation. And as they start to, implement the program, they realize it's going to be more expensive than they initially thought. And so speaking of that posturing and that true partnership between funder and implementing partner, they have gone back to the foundation and said, this is proving to be more costly than we thought. We still want to run it the way we said. We still want to collect all the M&E. Is there any room in your budget to meet us where these costs are? And I know of 4 times just in the first quarter of 2023 where the foundation has said, oh yeah, thanks for telling us, from small community-based foundations to great big ones. So, just a little, high five to everyone on this call to be comfortable having those conversations. You are 50% partners in this work, and nobody should be, out there losing money and really harming themselves and their team on a grant from a foundation.
We have time for another question. Shay, do you want to unmute? Where do you start when you have never fundraised before? And what's the first time raising a proper budget? Ooh, budget's a hard one, but where do you start when you've never fundraised before? I think that's a good one.
Yep, that's where I was going. We're not a new organization. Quiet. My dog wants to kind of include herself in the conversation. We're not a new organization, but we've gone from a hobby to like, hey, maybe we can draw a salary, maybe we can pay the people that are working for us. And it's quite new for us to think of how to put a budget together. Who do we go for fundraising? How to even do fundraising? We started going to applying for grants locally. I'm in the Netherlands, but I'm from New York. You can hear the accent. Sorry about that. That's just how it is. We're still new to it, so we're in that kind of growing space where we're figuring things out. And I'm just wondering, we're still new. We're like, even though we've been around since 2017, I feel suddenly we're like babies all of a sudden. We've been doing this work for free. We've been getting volunteers. And suddenly now we're like, okay, let's make a budget.
Let me pass that on to Lisa. How do you get that initial? I know the budget you can't answer yet. Stay tuned for future sessions.
Yeah, Shay, it's so great to meet you. Thanks for the question. Yeah, I don't know that and actually, I think my email's on the slide somewhere, but I'll put it in chat to you. You can definitely email me. We can talk more. Budgets is beyond kind of the scope, but I work with organizations all the time that are just starting for the first time to think about how to fundraise and mobilize resources. I think there's two lanes I would focus on. The first is your message, right? So I would think about how it is that we're capturing what your organization does. Even if it's new, that's okay. We don't need all these impact stats that say you've been doing this for decades and you have this proven, model. It's okay. We can engage funders around the impact you want to have. And we can engage them around, your vision as you see it in your organization's vision. So get your message right. And by the way, it's never going to be perfect. I don't want to give anyone the impression you needs to be perfect before you go out and use it. It's always a work in progress. So work on your message. And then 2, I would work on your prospecting. So I would use that identify, prioritize, strategize framework. And I would, start to identify who are potential funders for the work you're doing. And then if you have X number of hours to spend a week, how should we rank them? And then how can we get visits? Once we get those visits, then we're going to come back to the messaging. You're going to share that message with the funder.
I would maybe add to,
yeah, thanks, Mallory.
Yeah, I love everything that you just said. And I think that's where the asset mapping exercise can also be really helpful, because you can start to see, okay, we don't have that impact data yet necessarily, but we can educate funders around the connection between these two issue areas. And then also, I think when you're doing prospecting, paying attention to whether or not funders fund, pilot, or launch programs. I think some funders are very explicit about the fact that they don't do that, and some are very explicit about the fact that they do that, and others are not explicit. But I think starting to try to notice that and recognize that there are particular funders who are looking exactly, as Lisa was saying before, exactly for you. There are certain, and I have a podcast episode, I'll try to find it really quickly, talking about the different types of funders in particular and things to look for when you're trying to find a pilot funder and a launch funder. So let me try to pull that up. I have a podcast called What the Fundraising. I'll find that really quickly while Lisa maybe answers the next question.
That's great. Thanks, Mallory. Thanks, Shay. I'm just looking in chat now. How much time does the ED need to spend on fundraising? Is it solely his or her responsibility? Hermela, this is going to be the least satisfying answer ever. I'm sorry, but it depends. How big is the organization? In bigger organizations, you have a person or two, or sometimes a team to work on fundraising. If it's a small organization, a lot of times the ED, it is his or her responsibility. So it just really kind of depends on the organization and where you are. I would say, however, it's never solely the executive director's responsibility. All right, you can bring in team members, you can bring in beneficiaries, you can bring in board members, you can have a team approach. And actually, I think the next session that I'm going to do with Natalie is about how everybody on the team can be considered a fundraiser. As far as how much time to spend a week on it or a month on it, it just depends on what your funding need is and how close you are to it. But I will share this. It's really helpful if you work it into your routine in a consistent way each week and batch time for it. We see that across the board. That is the best practice for people who wear many, many hats. If you can batch time to spend on fundraising, you'll probably have greater results.
Great.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, Mallory, all you.
I was just going to say, the link is above. I can drop it again. But one of the questions that just came through is, how can we know the capacity of the prospective funder and the connection to the case, if not only looking at their profile? Is there another way? So I'm not sure where the profile, maybe they were talking about the link that was shared before. Sometimes 990s for foundations have this information. Sometimes it's listed on their website, and you can get a sense for the amounts and types of organizations they've invested in. I mean, honestly, you could use tools like ChatGPT to ask questions about it, which is a new AI tool. With a language model, you could ask questions about where the funder has funded and then validate and verify that information, definitely. But that can give you a sense for other projects they've invested in, Googling them to find other organizations they've invested in. Yeah, the United States have 990s that can be helpful for foundations located here, but there's a lot of information sort of buried in the internet as well.
And I think we need to also be comfortable that we may not know going into a conversation, and that's okay. We also might not know their connection to the cause. And so this is part of what's so important about having this conversation, that we're engaging a funder and asking, why did you take this call? I'm sure there's a million people trying to get on your calendar. What about our work in Malawi interests you? So some of these questions we're going to find out by talking to them. Now, Jimmy, as far as like being able to prioritize those funders, if we don't know those numbers, it's okay to make a guess, and this is just a framework for you to help kind of devote your time to your best funders. But sometimes we'll find out what the capacity is by having a conversation with the funder, and they'll tell us, I can't do, $1,000 this year, but I could give you 500. Okay, well, that's their capacity then right there. So sometimes we're just not going to know, and we're going to have a conversation about it. Should we keep going through these questions? Is that okay? And I guess people just drop off if they want. Does that work? Okay, great. Okay, I am going. So there's Jimmy. Somebody up here said, how to close a conversation smoothly when it becomes apparent interest is feeble. Mallory, do you have any thoughts on that?
Wait, can you start that sentence again? I'm trying to find the question.
Yeah, it's up above. And I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. I think it's Aditya or Adita. How to close a conversation when it becomes apparent that it's likely not going to come to fruition.
I mean, I think clarity is a real gift to both the funder and to you as an organization. And I think there are you can very easily say, it doesn't sound like we're finding alignment here around, X, Y, and Z. And we're so grateful for the work that you do to do blank, but it sounds like perhaps we're not the right organization to partner with. Would you like recommendations of other organizations working in X community, or we'd be happy to connect you. But I think just saying that, like, you see that there's an alignment issue. And I think focusing on alignment between your organization and the funder is also really helpful. It's not this personal thing, right? It's like, I'm feeling like maybe there is an alignment between how we do blank and how you're interested in doing blank. And that's a totally appropriate, compassionate, respectful of somebody's time, and I think really appreciated, especially when it's said with an invitation to try to help them connect to folks who might be more aligned with them.
I love everything, Mallory. That makes great sense to me, and clarity is a gift. When we create that list of our funders, it's a great practice to be moving them up, down, or off our list. So even moving funders off our list, while we can take a minute and be sad about it, we get to then populate with new funders, right? So I think that clarity can be really helpful. Benoy, I see your question about Indian nonprofits and my experience, or our experience from the past. Mallory, I'll let you jump in if you have any thoughts. But Benoy, I actually have been really lucky. I sit on a board for an organization that works in India, and I have worked with a couple Indian nonprofits. And there's some India unique considerations with some of the rules around fundraising there. I'm a lawyer too, so I can't help but share that. And I think maybe we could even, if anyone wants to talk about India, we could have another conversation offline. But what I have found far and wide with work I've done in India and for the board I sit on is that the best time spent fundraising is with foundations there. And we've had some luck with diaspora people moving abroad and working with individuals. But there are some tricky legal considerations that maybe you and I, actually, let me just start my my name in the chat. I hope that's probably not too helpful. That's very broad, but I'd be happy to talk more. Okay, here I am. Healthy follow-up routine. Are there good templates for a continuation to the above question? How to close a conversation smoothly? Okay, I love talking about follow-up. So you guys are going to be so sick of me talking about threes, but we talk about follow-up as a rule of three. Okay, so we want to follow up in 3 ways. 1, with our own organization. So what does that mean? Write your call notes right after or pretty soon thereafter. Because even writing your call notes on what happened on that call 2 and 3 days down the road, we're going to forget parts of what happened on that call. So we put in our call notes and quotes. If you can remember certain quotes the funder said, anything we can capture that we can then use later on down the road to engage that funder. So follow up with your organization with call notes, how you keep them, whether it be in a Google Drive or Salesforce or any of these, management systems, I don't care, but just do that. 2, follow up with yourself. It's a really great practice to keep a journal or just a reflection notebook for how you're feeling like calls are going, how you felt going into it, anything you learned coming out of it, because this is very soul-bearing work and it's really rewarding if we can kind of keep track of our own experience throughout the process. Okay, 3rd, follow up with the funder. Okay. Imperfect follow-up within 24 or 36 hours is way better than perfect follow-up 5 days down the road. All right, so it's not going to be a perfect email coming 24 or 36 hours down the road, but it's important to follow up, thank them for the conversation, outline next steps, and kind of sum up the call. When possible, keep the ball in your court. So if the funder says to us, I don't know, I'm going to need, to talk to the board or the family or whomever, completely understand. Would it be okay if I check back in with you in mid-September? Okay, so when you're able, keep the ball in your court so things don't kind of like go into oblivion, never to be heard of again. So that imperfect follow-up within 24 to 36 hours is great. As far as templates, I actually don't really have a template. It's pretty customized per the conversation I had, but Mallory, I wonder if you have anything to add.
Well, I would say in all of there were questions about sort of outreach and starting conversations with particular types of funders. I think the primary thing in all of my email outreach is to focus on that alignment piece as the central pillar. So both when you are doing initial outreach to really speak to that alignment. So I loved our conversation recently. I was so struck by our alignment around XYZ. I love the work you're doing around blank, particularly excited to follow up on X. Here's the blank, right? So like simple bullet points, but really speaks to what you heard that funder say, where the alignment exists between you and them. Make the email something that's super easy for them to forward and share without a lot of other context. I think can be really helpful. And then the other thing is, I don't know how you feel about this, Lisa, but I think after a certain amount of follow-up, I, in my email, kind of close out and say, I was really struck by our alignment when we spoke X, Y, and Z. I haven't been able to get in touch with you since. I'm not sure if something has shifted on your end in terms of your interest in working together, but I don't want to be hounding you. So I wanted to send this last email, and this is usually like the 6th or 7th email. And throughout those other ones, I have sent other sort of information, or I wanted to share this thing that came up that really resonated with what we talked about the other day. But then that last email is really saying like, I'm gonna let you go. But I would love some clarity, if something had shifted on your end. And I'll say that actually that email gets a lot of responses because people saying, no, I'm sorry. Things have just been so busy. Thank you for saying this and continuing to follow up. And so, yeah, that can be, but then sometimes it also just, like Lisa said, your time is your most valuable asset. So not spending time on things that are not going to move forward is a really important piece.
It's great. Well, thank you so much. We absolutely love this session. Super excited to learn so much from both of you. So we want to wrap up with a quick poll. We'd love to get your feedback on the session, give them the feedback as well, and kind of prove the value of our systems learning team and all the work that we're doing to host these sessions. So Caroline's going to launch that poll. There you go. It's some very quick questions. As that poll is up, I'd like to remind you about the upcoming session with the team. So the last one is We Are All Fundraisers. Everyone is a fundraiser from the interns to the board. It is after Catalyzing Change Week on May 30th. So be sure to mark your calendar. You might want to go ahead and register right now and do that. I normally do a summary of the session. You will have that in the PowerPoint slides that you receive, so no worries there. But do please think about attending Catalyzing Change Week. There are 260 sessions going on at the same time. Lots of choices and opportunities, lots of social entrepreneurs to learn and from. It starts next week, May 1st through 5th, and it is all over the world. So I ended perfectly on time as my alarm went off. Let's all unmute, say thank you so much to our speakers, and hope everyone has a great end to the rest of their day. Thanks again,
Thank
Mallory and
you.
Lisa.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Stay in touch. It's so nice to meet you all. Thank you.
So nice to meet you all. Thank you.